So welcome, everybody. We're really thrilled to welcome you back to another season of webinars that have been organized by the TDSBs, the Toronto District School Boards, Sustainability Office and Eco Schools Program, in partnership with the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education here at the University of Toronto. My name is Hilary Inwood. I'm the coordinator of the Sustainability and Climate Action Network. And I'm really thrilled to introduce you to some of the members of the two teams that partner on these webinars. I'd like to introduce you to Chris Petropoulos and Jen Vetter, who are long-standing members and staff members in the Eco Schools program. And I'm really thrilled to introduce the newest member of the Eco Schools program, and that is Alicia Roberge. And Alicia is our new instructional leader. And Alicia, did you want to say a few words?
Sure. Yes. I'm pleased to meet everyone. I attended these sessions, while I was a teacher last year and the year before, and I've learned a lot and made some good relationships with people, and built on it. So looking forward to do it in the new role as instructional leader. Nice to meet everyone.
And we're really thrilled to have you as a member of the team now, Alicia. We're looking forward to working with you over the next few years to deepen the work of climate change education and environmental and sustainability education, both with people who work in K-12 education, but also in higher ed, in early childhood education. We are very happy to have anybody who would like to attend these webinars join us for them. I also just wanted to very briefly mention the members of the OISE team who are here today too. Sarah Urquhart, who helps to coordinate these webinars, and Sarah and Angie, who are also members of the SCAN team at OISE. So thank you so much for your support today too. So navigating climate emotions in K-12 classrooms is our topic for today's webinar. I didn't count them up. Chris, you and I should count these at some point. I think we're up to 40 odd webinars that we've done on a whole wide range of topics since the pandemic. We started doing the webinars when the pandemic hit, and we're of course well past that now, but we're still finding it's a really great way to bring people together and help to support teachers and other educators' professional learning in climate change education. So we're really thrilled today to be doing some focused work on climate emotions. We'll begin with a land acknowledgement. And let me just give you a little webinar overview. This is what you can expect. We'll start with the land acknowledgement, and then we'll move on. I'm going to give you an introduction to Meghan Wise, who is our amazing speaker for today as well. Meghan picked the artwork for today. Thank you for doing that, Meghan. And I love this piece. It's a drum, in fact, and it's by an Indigenous artist named Taylor Batiste, who grew up in the Nkami First Nation, which is between the mountains and, this is a BC lake, Osoyoos Lake. Am I pronouncing that right, Meghan? I'm hoping so. Taylor draws inspiration from the Okanagan First Nation land, culture, and traditions, and this is a piece she did as part of an Emily Carr exhibition in 2022. The artwork is explained as the drum representing the heartbeat of the land and people. Bitterroot, which is the plant depicted on the surface, is one of the Okanagan Nation's 4 food chiefs. The drum is made using elk, rawhide, wood frame, and sinew. So thank you so much. I will acknowledge at this point too that we are hosted on the lands for these webinars, at least in terms of where we produce them, on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples across the land that we now call Canada. So with that, I would like to introduce you to our keynote speaker for today. We are thrilled to be introducing you to Meghan Wise, who is a settler descendant of Danish, Irish, and Ukrainian farmers who grew up in the territory of the Syilx people of the Okanagan Nation. Meghan has a background in political science with research experience in ideology and climate denialism, parallels between the COVID pandemic and climate change, climate migration, climate and gender, and the intersections of mental health, well-being, and community resilience amid climate change. Meghan works as a climate coordinator, facilitates climate care and well-being workshops, authors community-facing climate resources, and an enthusiastic nature lover and an artist. I'm going to pop the link in a minute into, or maybe Sarah could do that, to her artistic work. So Meghan, we're thrilled to have you here. This is such an important topic. So many of us are hearing from our students that they are suffering negative effects from the climate crisis on their mental health. And so we're really thrilled to be learning from you today. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me into your space today and for the shared time together today. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you for, again, having this shared time together today. It's really important that we create these spaces to have these conversations, and so I'm really thankful for that. I'm from the Okanagan Valley. That is where I grew up. That is where my heart home is, and that is still Okanagan territory, but I am joining today from the ancestral and unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. So I'm very thankful and very honored to be able to live, learn, and unlearn and relearn on these important lands and territories with a lot of Indigenous communities leading really important climate environmental work here. So this is just a little snapshot of our journey today. We're going to be moving into some grounding just to give ourselves the opportunity to understand what we're moving into. We're going to check in a little bit of terminology. We're going to look at climate impact specifically on students and climate impact specifically on climate educators. And we're also going to look at climate emotions, navigating climate emotions, and disproportionate impacts in relationship to climate change, emotions, well-being, and then strategies for engagement and action as well. To start, though, I'm conscious we have a lot of folks maybe joining out from out east. I'm out west, different times, but it's the end of a workday or a lunch break or a moment in your day. And so I really want to start us off with just a stretch and a breath. So cameras off on whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever feels good in your body in this context. But I actually am just going to stretch up because I have been working and I'm going to quickly stretch, and I encourage folks to stretch with me, and I encourage folks to just give a little like wiggle, shoulders, just take a second for yourself, get in your body and take a breath. So, and I find that very helpful, especially going into a space like this where we're going to just be talking and chatting about some more complex issues and themes. So hopefully just settle in your body a little bit and join along on the journey today. And as we situate ourselves today in these issues, in these contexts, I want to acknowledge that we are navigating today in this space emotional climate themes. And I'll be asking people to reflect on issues like climate anxiety and to make connections to how climate change is impacting our lives and our communities and the world around us. And I understand that that means inviting us into a space of vulnerability, which I recognize can also be difficult and uncomfortable. But I also know that sharing from experience, I also know that sharing and articulating our fears and our worries, our discomfort about the different impacts of climate change, it can help us feel less alone. It can help us feel less overwhelmed in navigating these types of emotions and challenges that we are facing. And the more we can do this together, the more manageable, hopefully, it can become. And as we do move into more discussion today, I do invite everyone here today to, not that I would expect any different, but to engage with care and dignity and respect that everyone here is working at their own unique pace for their own unique context and reasons on how to navigate these themes, on how to explore climate issues. And we're all in different phases of our learning journey, and that's okay and that's good. And that's why we come together to learn from each other. So embracing our curiosity, embracing our humility as we learn, as we share, as we listen to each other can really help to hold space for building that trust that we need. I had a picture earlier that said move at the speed of trust. And care and you know, we need this amid this vulnerability and these difficult contexts. So as we get going as a group today, I really want to hold open an opportunity for folks in this space to share what you were hoping to learn or take away from today. I want to make sure that the space here that we have today is shared, is applicable, is valuable. And so we're going to use the chat space today to add different comments and reflections and you know, share and emotions and resources and things like that. So I want to use the chat today. It's a bit of a community forum. And I'd really like to invite folks to just use that space to add something you're looking to take away from today. I'll give folks a second to just reflect on that, and I'm going to pull that over there. Yeah, something that you hope that you're looking forward to, what drew you to this space to begin with. And so just take a second and offer that there. Mm. Mm-hmm. I'm reading these as they come in. So yeah, action-oriented. I saw that idea of hope, hopelessness, support navigating between optimism and despair. We are going to get to that. I hear you. How not to get stuck in the negative feelings. We will get to that. Yes, helping children with climate anxiety. Oh, this fills my heart. Thank you for sharing that, because we will be touching on these things. And so I'm hoping that in our process today that we can navigate some of these and reflect on some of these concerns or issues or themes that you're bringing into that chat space today. And again, I'm glad folks are sharing in there, because it lets other folks know different challenges that you're facing as well. So please keep adding. I'm just going to move on to some terminology, but please keep reflecting on that, and please keep adding to the chat as we go. I also want to start with grounding us in some terminology so that we have this shared meaning of some of the terms that are still evolving, and they might hold different meaning and nuance across different regions and cultures. So I want to get clear on some of the key terms that I'm going to be using today that I mean when I talk about these things. And we might have conversations about how that changes or what shifts in that. So the first one is climate anxiety, which many of you may have heard of already, maybe not. It again is these are still evolving and kind of unfolding terms. We're finding language that we need to talk about these issues. And climate anxiety can be thought of fear, stress, or worry due to past, ongoing, reoccurring, or future climate impacts and processes. That idea of a sense of threat and uncertainty when we think about the future, including the future instability of our systems, our human systems. Climate anxiety can be mental, it can be emotional, but it can also be physical, and it can also be metaphysical and spiritual. And recognizing that climate change presents impacts across a wide scope of our being, of our existence, and on different levels and on different timescales. So that's, a big term. When we say climate anxiety, it captures a lot. And then there's this idea of eco-anxiety, and it's related to, interconnected to climate anxiety, but eco-anxiety has a bit of a nuance that I see in it, which is related to anxieties that can refer more broadly to, or distress or worry about, or even guilt or shame related to environmental and ecological harms and degradations, more specifically, that stem from human actions. So climate is this broader human ecological interconnection. Eco-anxiety might be more related to some of those eco features, environment, ecosystems, environmental systems and processes. The other one I want to touch on, there's two more I want to touch on. One is solastalgia, which I think is an important term when we see people losing landscapes around them. So solastalgia is this feeling of distress caused by or experiencing or witnessing harm to cherished landscapes and environments. We're losing this sense of place, and it's this loss of place that really identifies with you and who you are as a human in the world. And the last one I'm going to touch on, there's lots of terminology, but I want to touch on these to give us some kind of language and also some clarity on pathways and this idea of climate wayfinding. And climate wayfinding is about knowing where you are, knowing where you're going, how to get there, how to recognize when you're there, how to find your way out of a place. And wayfinding, this idea of wayfinding, enables problem solving and moving around spaces and using consistent environmental clues. And I think this is a really important dynamic for thinking about navigating, not getting stuck in our climate anxieties. We can wayfind our way through this. And so I think that's a helpful term to think about climate anxiety, eco denial, or anger, or trauma, pairing those together in an interesting way. So to move into some of these more specific lenses on students and educators, I want to move into looking at the youth perspective to start. And some folks may have heard of this study. It was a really powerful study that was done in 2021. It was a study of 10,000 youth, and it found, 75% found the future frightening. 56 believed humanity is doomed, that idea of doomism, and over 50% experiencing feelings, this range of feelings: sadness, anxiety, angry, powerless, helpless, guilty. Those are coming from youth. That's the youth voice that is saying, this is how we feel, this is how we see the world. And I find that very concerning. I find it very alarming. And there's opportunities to support youth in navigating this. And then we also, again, thinking about timescales. right? So we have to think about this generationally as well. Climate change is both rapid and slow, and short, medium, and long term. So it's very complex in that way. And young people will face significantly more climate impacts over their lifetimes. And so we have to think about this in relationship to how we think about generational trauma, how we think about long-term health and well-being and mental health in the ways that we navigate now and into the future. And then we have these student climate contexts more specifically. So digging into that a little bit more, I think it's important to start with and recognize that whether we bring climate change learning into the classrooms or educational spaces, whatever those look like or not. So if we bring it in or if we don't bring it in into our practice and processes, students are still regularly living through climate anxieties, and they are bearing witness to various climate traumas, both locally and globally, through direct, indirect, vicarious, persisting climate impacts. So this means that students are often holding and navigating climate anxiety and trauma, whether we address climate change in our spaces or not. It's there. And we know through good research and ongoing research and unfolding research that high stress states and trauma can decrease cognitive capacity to fully engage in learning and knowledge retention. For example, research on student heat exposure finds that cumulative heat exposure can reduce motivation, ability to focus, our cognitive processing. I know when I'm in an overheated space, I can't think clearly. I don't function well. My emotions aren't regulated well if I can't cool down. Thinking about students in wildfire, because I'm picking some of the big ones. Again, Canada, thinking about heat increases, thinking about wildfire increases. There's a whole host of other issues as well, but just picking a couple here that are relevant in a context. This was a study that was done post Fort McMurray fires, which saw higher rates of PTSD, depression, anxiety, and lower self-esteem in students who experienced the Fort McMurray wildfire evacuations. So on the screen here, out of almost 3,100 students, this is how they were seeing the impacts take place. There was PTSD, there was depression, some of it severe depression or moderate, climate anxiety as well. And overall, 46% of students met the criteria for one or more of a probable diagnosis of things like PTSD, depression, anxiety, alcohol, or substance abuse. And interestingly, this included students who were both present in the Fort McMurray wildfire at the time and not. So that might have been their home community, but they weren't present or they weren't evacuated, but it still impacted them. So thinking again about direct and indirect or vicarious anxieties and traumas there and how those are interrelated. I think it's really important when we think about these ideas of flooding or smoke pollution from forest fires, wildfires, heat domes, and things like that. It's not just in the classroom. Students may be going home to wildfire impacted communities or flood impacted communities or home spaces, heat impacted living spaces. So students may be navigating strained living conditions both before and after the classroom conditions. So this ties into the importance of thinking about things like equity and thinking about how different communities might be affected when we're navigating different impacts of climate change. And we'll touch on climate equity in a little bit as well. And then I really want to take a minute to highlight the unique context of educators and climate change. And I think there's importance of recognizing that as educators, you do hold a really unique context and challenge as being the communicator of climate change knowledge and issues. So first of all, you are all human beings in the world, which means each of you are also navigating your own direct, indirect, vicarious, and persisting climate emotions and experiences. Just as people in the world, you are a part of this too as a human being, and you have to figure out how to navigate this as well. So on top of you just doing your best as a human being, which you're all doing great, you're here, you showed up, you're crushing it, well done, folks. There is this added layer of being tasked with communicating the realities of climate change to others, to a younger generation. And this comes with its own pressures and its own challenges and its own burdens, because it can be very anxiety-inducing to be the source of raising someone else's awareness of a very pressing and anxiety-inducing issue like climate change. And so we need to be conscious of that. And to be honest, we actually aren't sure about how climate change is impacting workplace behaviors and culture. There is actually very little research right now. There's some, it's happening, it's starting to happen, that understands how climate change is impacting different professional workplaces, professional capacities, and mental health in those professional work spaces, specifically from issues and impacts of climate change. And so this means that we're learning together as we go, and it reinforces, again, the importance of building out networks of support like we're doing here today. And of course, we also know that schools will need to play a critical role in leading climate change education and building up this climate action response, our competencies in that. But how we go about that mindfully so that we are addressing associated mental health and well-being, climate emotion needs for both students and educators. It's a paired, give and take process that we're navigating there. With that kind of pause on educator context and climate change, I do want to come back to this community, and I want to ask you, what is an emotion you are feeling when you think about engaging with climate education work? Again, you're being, invited into this space of engaging in climate communication. And how are you feeling about that? Do you feel prepared? Do you feel unprepared? Do you feel worried about it? What are your concerns? And so if you want to share in the chat what that feels like for you, again, this is an opportunity for us to see how others are feeling, check in on where we're at with that, and find ways to support each other in doing that. So I encourage folks to offer that in the chat as well if you're comfortable. And I just see somebody saying a professional duty of care. Yeah, climate education and preparation is a duty of care. And I love that framework. I love that framework a lot. And then there's those questions of right or well. There's no perfect. But we can try, and we can just try and do well and uplift dignity and care. And we can talk about that in a bit as well. Tired, but still motivated. Yes. Thank you. I love it. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. It's really important to see each other share these concerns and worries, because we learn from each other in that. And we actually do find some solidarity and ability to think, okay, well, how will we problem solve some of these big questions? So I really appreciate your time to share. And as we keep offering, again, just if I'm going to move on, but please do offer. And because I want to dig into the deeper contextualizing of climate emotions. And, sorry, moving the slides on you there. And I'm sure everyone here is aware, you're all here, you're all aware of this issue, that climate change weirding, I'm using that term, Catherine Hayhoe's term, climate change weirding impacts are recognized as increasingly impacting our individual, our community experiences of extreme stress, of disruption, anxiety, PTSD, depression, feelings of loss and grief and trauma. I saw someone say tired, depressed, frustrated, I see in the chat right there. Vulnerable is another one. And yes to all of that. And we do see these impacts through things like the magnified wildfire evacuations that we saw in the Okanagan, in my home communities, in Banff, in Yellowknife, in Shuswap, into Kamloops, and Fort McMurray over the years. And we've also seen rising in flash flooding and risks, thinking about Toronto not too long ago, but I also feel like I open my news and I'm seeing a community flood every, once in a century flood once a week or a month or that kind of thing. And we're also seeing extreme heat. A lot of communities are navigating extreme heat impacts as well, not to mention species impacts and decline and systemic ecological degradation. Now, I do not mention these things to add or to deepen to anyone's fear or worry or grief or rage in this space. That is not my intention. And I really do extend care to anyone facing or navigating these challenges. I've been there. I understand it is difficult. It takes a lot to navigate and move through and find some balance in that. But I say these things out loud because climate magnified impacts are real. They are happening. And these realities require bearing witness, which we do. We see it, we live it, we feel it, but we can only truly address and navigate what we're willing to acknowledge. So I want to acknowledge these realities that we, and particularly youth, are being forced to increasingly navigate. And in this space of acknowledgement is where we can then work to find meaningful pathways to care-based action, to shared learning, to healing, and capacity building for needed change. And I want to be very clear in stating that, all of the feelings we've been talking about, all of the emotions we've been, kind of naming, all of these feelings and emotions that we have, that youth have, that students have as a result of human-generated climate impacts they're not innately bad or pathologically unhealthy. Emotions like anxiety and distress and dread and grief and rage and despondency, hopelessness. I saw somebody put hopelessness in there earlier, or even feelings of futility for that matter. They're valid. And they can be very rational responses to legitimate threats posed by climate change impacts on our communities, on our systems, and our well-being. And because of the scale and the complexity that is climate change. So holding space open for and providing that validation that is warranted for these feelings is critical. And it is a needed part of being able to acknowledge and to confront and navigate them so that we don't become consumed by or stuck in them. I saw somebody earlier in the chat say how to not get stuck in this. And part of not getting stuck in it is validating it, saying, what am I feeling? Okay, yeah, that's a rational feeling. Climate change is a threat. Climate change is causing risks. Climate change is causing harm. So that is not unhealthy to say, I feel anxious about that. I feel upset by that. I feel anger by that. So finding ways to open space for validation and care for that. And I know educators, there's a lot of educators in the room today, and I know educators tend to be very attuned to when students might be presenting signs of emotional distress or becoming withdrawn or anxious or disruptive due to all sorts of reasons and factors. So the idea here is to add a climate lens of consideration as part of the possible underlying factors of what might actively be impacting student emotional health and well-being. We know there's all sorts of things, but what might be those climate stressors that are also something to be aware of as well? And also thinking about how these emotions unfold and how we hold them. I want to stress that the reality of climate issues are messy. They're very complicated. Somebody in the chat said about like despair and hope at the same time. And it's interesting you say that, because in 2024, there was a survey of post-secondary students, and the majority of students respondents reported both a mixture of empowering and paralyzing emotional states that were ranging from sadness to hope. So it's important to recognize that we shouldn't be seeking to replace or swap out anyone's climate worries of distress or this binary idea of like hopium or candy-coated positivity, because that's not authentic. We're holding these ideas of empowerment and optimism with this idea of paralyzing dread or grief at the same time. And so making sure that we're not trying to swap one out for the other, because that's just not how humans work. We really do need to help each other build out the confidence and the emotional tools that we need to navigate uncertainty, and our ability to hold this messiness and these complexities without shutting down emotionally or getting stuck in persisting loops of distress or dread. So quick takeaways on this contextualizing climate emotions are: climate is indeed having notable impacts on mental health and well-being. Difficult or non-positive feelings about climate change are not innately wrong or bad. Climate emotions do need validation, like all emotions, so that we can confront and face them. And we need to get better at being able to sit in some uncertainty and some messiness, and learn how to navigate that in ways that are possible, doable, manageable. And we need each other to be able to do this work. I mentioned a little earlier about this idea of disproportionate impacts or climate equity. And I want to shift into this because it is so deeply interrelated with our understanding of climate mental health and well-being and climate emotions at the same time. And so digging into this idea, I think it's important to recognize that at its core, climate equity should be understood as a framework for uplifting personal, collective, and systemic care and dignity, which I think, sorry, I'm moving your slides again, which I think we can all agree is a good thing. A little care and dignity goes a long way in community. And so by engaging a climate equity framework, it calls on us to understand how different groups and different people are impacted by climate change to different degrees for different reasons. And I think a majority of youth and students really respond to and deeply understand ideas of what it is when something's not fair, right? When there's an injustice. And I think youth get that from a very young age. And I think that's something to work with and really recognize and build on. And climate equity approaches acknowledge how social, political, economic factors like race and gender, class, age, disability, sexuality, wealth, power, interact with the causes, the processes, the impacts, as well as the solutions associated with climate change, because recognizing that not all solutions are innately just. All climate solutions are not created equal, so to speak. They can perpetuate harm as well to already marginalized or made vulnerable communities if they're not done through kind of an equity lens. And I think we should consider climate impacts in the context of multiple intersecting crises. So, for example, we know COVID had clear disproportionate health, economic, social impacts on Indigenous communities, on Black and communities of color, the elderly, disabled people, and essential workers, and on youth mental health. Now, we also know that these same communities are often systemically situated to face the most dire pressures and consequences of expanding climate impacts like flooding or extreme heat or air pollution, food security, among other pressures and stressors as well. So youth factors such as age, lack of access to power, resources, and constrained agency play a significant role in youth's vulnerability and their risk to climate change impacts and their power to be able to change that for themselves. I don't fault youth for getting out in the streets. I don't fault youth for trying to find ways to say, how do we change it because we feel powerless? So again, thinking about, climate equity. So when we think about historical, existing, or persisting inequities and how they're merged with climate change impacts, we will and we do see a widening of inequity, disparity, and increase of harm. So by bringing this climate equity lens, by talking about it, by teaching about it, and by taking action to foster, a climate equity framework in the work that we do, is to tangibly expand community care, to uplift health and safety and dignity, which then actually improves, and we've seen this in the research and the data, it actually improves overall community health, well-being, and resilience as well. So again, I think we can agree that's a good thing. That was the heavier part. That the first part's the heavier part. That's the heavy emotions part. That's the heavy, these are the realities we face part. And I recognize that can be a lot, just to kind of, again, communicate it, articulate it, raise up the awareness, saying, hey, this is happening, hey, this is real. And that can just kind of make our shoulders raise up a little bit. So I just want to encourage folks to take a little wiggle again and take a little stretch if you need it, take a breath. We're going to transition into looking at some actions and strategies and things like that, but it's really important to ground us in those contexts to get started. And, again, I don't articulate this to cause harm or anxiety, but I articulate it to acknowledge it, to lay it out in front of us so that we can see it, so that we know how to deal with it and explore of how to address it. Okay, and I also want to invite folks. The chat's been going, and that's amazing. I'm really looking forward to actually having an opportunity to go back and read more carefully what folks are adding in there. I am so thankful when folks are sharing that. And please do share just kind of how you're feeling at this moment as well. See how things are resonating for you. Okay, so I'm going to move into looking at some strategies. I'm going to look at things like making space, listening, leveraging language, expanding perspectives, and embracing different levels and forms of action. But I also know that teachers are often maxed out for capacity. I recognize that. So the goal here is not to pile on more for you to do. Sometimes here's actions, and then it feels overwhelming because it's like, well, do I have to do all those? And the answer is no and yes, and it's up to you, right? That is something we can help offer these frameworks. And the goal is to connect you with, again, the ideas and the approaches and the frameworks that possibly tap into or tweak or shift and adapt what you're already doing. The hope is to ease and open capacity, not strain it further for you. So first up, we're going to look at space to listen and be heard. So looking at co-creating frameworks, what does that look like? Do that with students. What does it look like and sound like and feel like to be heard? Being clear that your climate emotions are valid. What does validation also then look like? Encouraging people that sharing makes us feel less alone, upholding respect and dignity, being curious and asking some gentle questions about where those feelings are coming from. Offering quiet assignments such as journaling for looking into the feelings where you don't have to expose yourself. Again, that fear of vulnerability. Pacing out the climate assignments as well so that you're not stacking them all. Climate check-ins and things like that are good, or they are great, but if you're doing them every day, you're actually maybe having the opposite intended impact, which is getting people to think about it all the time. So thinking about how to balance out that space and how you're calling into space and then leaving space and calling into space as well. And using imaginative assignments, for example, that offer students the opportunity to explore things they might not have the language for yet. Again, me as an adult, I'm still trying to find the language to communicate climate emotions and feelings and impacts and things like that. And so recognizing youth are also trying to find the language they need to explain and articulate climate impacts on themselves. So finding ways to do that creatively is very helpful. Leveraging language. This next strategy is easy yet powerful because language sits really at the nexus of how we interpret and make sense of the world. So the language that we use to communicate climate change really does matter because our language can either actually increase student distress or worry or grief, or it can help to reduce or redirect thinking simply by the words and framing that we choose to engage when talking about climate change. There was a study looking at the relationship between educators framing and language and levels of distress in the class. And just by changing a couple of words, saw stress and anxiety either go up or go down. And so I'd have to find that. I can't remember which one it was, but it piqued my interest about how the language that we're using in relationship to climate change can be a tool for addressing that anxiety. And recognizing that youth are being bombarded with doom and gloom and fatalist narratives, and that can be terrifying. So thinking about how do we shift our language to not be so anxiety-inducing for youth and for ourselves. So, also recognizing that doomist and violent or negative, unethical use of climate language, so again, like climate metaphors, they can push us to conceptually understand a very complicated issue. So if we're talking about climate change and we use this concept of climate war, what we're actually asking people to do is think about the idea of war to understand climate change. That's how that metaphor works. And I'm not sure if that's the best framing that we want to think about responses to climate change through. So even just thinking about those narratives that we use and what they're signaling to youth and students to make sense of, and the responses required to that. So finding ways to reframe our doom and gloom narratives back to something that is maybe more nuanced, based in collaboration and care and collective messy hope. I call it messy hope because it is. And so that's an opportunity there to use our language. And then expanding perspectives. This one's also a critically important one for thinking about climate change. So the need for cross-disciplinary approaches. I'm sure folks in here have heard that term, stay in your lane, when it comes to thinking about, like, you know, fields and issues and areas of study or teaching or education, that kind of thing. But when it comes to the issue of climate change, there is no lane. Climate change cuts across all issues and contexts. So we're going to be messy drivers in this regard too. And I want to encourage folks to not only integrate climate change dynamics into your practices, but also reach out, collaborate, co-create, and design with other fields and areas, because what we're actually then doing is tapping into this idea of like multi-solving, and this idea of multi-solving for polycrisis. We need multiple solutions for a many-faceted challenge, right? So that's kind of what we're doing there. Climate work can't be siloed work. So thinking about that. And then also really important is to expand perspectives beyond the confines of the Western lenses that we tend to use in education systems. So recognizing that Indigenous peoples make up like 5% of the global population right now, but protect over 80% of the world's biodiversity. That is an incredible balance of care and stewardship for the entire ecosystems that we survive on and rely on. So climate work is a critical opportunity to engage in rich networks of Indigenous knowledge systems, and also talk about the importance of, again, equity in climate work and action. And I want to highlight here the importance of prioritizing care and dignity and respect and awareness for protocol when engaging with Indigenous knowledge systems and communities. I do invite folks, you know, to do any of the needed labor, take that labor on and work to learn about Indigenous protocols on how and when and where and what manner to engage with Indigenous held knowledges, or when reaching out to collaborate. What are those protocols that you need to engage? So it's of paramount importance to protect the capacity and the privacy of those processes and protocols. But please also know that there are amazing Indigenous-led resources that have been gifted to the world. So finding and exploring those as a starting point is fantastic. And, you know, I'm happy to share some after as well, but that can be an opportunity to dig deeper into understanding things like traditional ecological knowledge, two-eyed seeing, concepts of reciprocity, and systems thinking. And then levels of action. I only have 2 more slides, and it's levels of action, which is thinking about youth get a lot of messaging that climate action is an individual problem. It's an individual action. It's an individual process to be responsible for addressing very complex dynamic issues. And that can feel overwhelming, insurmountable. So the idea is, the messaging is, you recycle, you buy new lights, you fly less, you use less plastic. And yes, this is not to say that these are not important. They absolutely are. But we really do need to build up a dynamic scope of actions at the individual, at the community, at the collective, at the systems level, to help students understand that there are many different layered opportunities for interjecting action, and it's not just at the individual level. But that means we have to help them to understand, what does a community level engagement, action, interjection look like? What does a systems level engagement shift look like? So, you know, again, trying to help people understand it's not just at an individual level. Fossil fuel companies, for example, invented this idea of the carbon footprint because it makes it a lot better if it's the individual's responsibility, not the corporate or industry responsibility. It's not the system's responsibility. And, you know, yes, use less plastic, but also, should the corporations be allowed to sell you all that plastic? The answer is probably no. But again, it shifts the responsibility onto the individual. And then there's this question. This is one of the questions I hear the most in any engagement that I do, and it's the what can I do question. And it's a powerful question. And I love this Venn diagram by Dr. Anne Elizabeth Johnson, who came up with this Venn diagram as if you were feeling paralyzed, here's a starting point. And it asks you 3 questions. What brings you joy? What work needs doing? What are you good at? And in the middle is your climate action. And this can be used at the individual level, it can be used at a community or a group level, and it can also be used at a systems level. And that's what I love about this. It's simple, but it actually helps to focus some of that, what do I do? How do I get there? So wayfinding a little bit, right? And then just make connections to what people are already doing, which is, I tell a story of a student who I was in a workshop with, and they said, I'm really passionate about addressing the toxic drug supply and the opioid crisis, but I also feel like I need to work on climate change, and I don't see how that's helping. And all we had to do was have a conversation about how their work is mitigating community harm and vulnerability, which again is helping to increase community resilience and help people withstand the impacts of climate change. And so their work really was by addressing toxic drug supply and opioid crisis and vulnerable community, they were actually doing climate work. They just needed to see how it was connected. And so we just need to make connections between existing actions and climate action impact and how we might need to reframe it or tweak it just a little bit. And I think I'm going to stop there because I had one more slide just about co-creation and design. And this was an opportunity where I worked with a group of students, and we actually just brainstormed individual, collective, and systems level actions. And what did that look like? And so this is a list of some of those outcomes of when we had that brainstorm. And this is something that you can do by yourself, with a group, with students, with colleagues, to think about this at different levels as well. And so just an encouragement to co-create and co-design what action can actually look like. And I'm going to end it there because I want an opportunity to hear some questions and hear back from folks.
Meghan, what a rich talk. And I think that's absolutely being reflected in the chat. I'm sorry for the people who are not with us who will be watching this as a recording, because this is probably the most active chat we've had in a webinar in all of the years that we've been on.
I'd love to hear that.
So that's fantastic. Questions or comments for Meghan? Please just feel free to put your hand up, or you can pop it into the chat if you prefer. I love the suggestions for books that are in the chat. If you have more suggestions for books or resource guides, Sarah will be pulling together a resource list for us that we'll distribute in about a week along with the recording from this session. And so please feel free to pop your chat. I mean, I love that Catherine Hayhoe's books she's been mentioned a couple of times. She's actually a grad from the TDSB. Her dad was actually one of the outdoor education leaders in the TDSB in the past, and look where she is now. So, somebody had her as a student. More than one teacher had her as a student in the Toronto District School Board growing up. So I love that that teachers have had an impact on how she's thought about the world, and now she's sharing that with other people. So there's no doubt that your students, maybe not all of them will grow up to be climate champions, but lots of them can be when given the right teaching to support not only their climate emotions, but also their actions as well. Questions, comments? They put it all into the chat, I think.
I know, I've just been going through, there's so many different dynamics here. And first of all, I'm just so thankful for folks for sharing, because again, it is these opportunities to share books and resources and frameworks and things like that. And that is so powerful. So I recognize how valuable this chat is for community. Alexander.
Thank you, Meghan. I really loved this presentation. So many things to think about. One aspect I've been thinking about for years is how to address this climate injustice. You've summarized the problem very well, but for me, there's a big dilemma there. And on the one hand, you've got the obvious injustice, obvious discrimination, obvious reason to become active and engaged. On the other hand, I'm wondering to what extent we can avoid that all our engagement results not merely in heading straight for totally equitable universal misery.
Mm. Yeah, I hear you. And the idea of injustice is a very complicated one, because the way I see it is it's a systemic one. And one of the things I'm very passionate about is helping youth and students, everyone for that matter, because I find it very interesting that if you go out onto the street, for example, and you were just to stop 10 folks walking by and you said to them, explain to me how systems work. If you asked, how does a system work? Yeah, I think somebody might get through that. If you said, how do systems work in relationship to each other? I think it starts to get a little more complicated. And I think it's really important to help people understand how systems work, because a lot of our current systems are innately unjust. You know, there's a lot of injustice that are deeply embedded to the systems that we rely on. These are economic systems, these are energy systems, housing systems, systems of law, you name it, right? And how do we then understand how to shift the systems to be more just, more caring, more dignity preserving? But again, we get so caught up in just the idea of living life, and the systems are kind of these things in the background, but it's the systems that are driving life, whether that be ecological systems, water systems, food systems. And so helping everybody, myself included, this is something I'm digging into right now. How are we understanding systems? And where are the opportunities to interject, to add that justice element, that equity element, that care element, that dignity element? And so you posed a very big and difficult question. And my instinct is to go look at the systems and really focus on how do we shift that? How do we untangle some of that and weave together something more just? I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Great answer.
I've got a question in the chat from Hart Bannock. Hello, Hart. Nice to have you here with us today. He says, Musi, for your chat and amazing art, a lot focused on teachers working with students. How might you suggest teachers working with teachers or colleagues, particularly if they seem resistant or disinterested? Oh, that's a tough one.
That's a great one. That's a really great one, because I go back to that idea of, I think there's a few elements to that. One is, like I said, I was in a meeting earlier today, and somebody in that meeting shared a reflection of meeting with teachers who were sharing their experiences of trying to navigate climate education. And one of the reflections was teachers were like, I just avoid it because I don't feel comfortable about it. Like I have emotions about it and it's complicated. And then I don't know how to navigate my own emotions, but then I'm asking other students to do that. So first of all, recognizing, going back to teachers as communicators of climate change and how to support each other in what that looks like to build out a network of support, build out resources of care, build out your understanding, build out your lexicon, build out your terminology, and also your confidence to sit in some messiness. You know, we're all still doing that. I know that I'm still trying to build out my confidence and ability to sit in messiness when it comes to these issues. So one of the questions would be, you know, first of all, find teachers that are interested. So find a network of folks who are kind of drawn to that instinctually and build that. When it comes to folks who are maybe a bit hesitant, going back to that idea of curiosity without judgment, curiosity and care and dignity. Why are you feeling that about this issue? Or what is it that maybe makes you feel like you don't want to address it? Or what is it that is causing you to not want to kind of step into that space? And then just listen, because in that listening, you might find an opportunity to find a thread that it's not about climate, but it might be about systems. It might be about energy. It might be about food. It might be about gardening. It might be about something that you see an opportunity for a shared value of an issue that you see as climate related, but they don't see as climate related. But by working on that issue, you're both doing a climate related thing, right? So that would be a way to kind of branch out these opportunities and frame it in a framework of, we're looking at student care and health. Somebody said in the chat earlier that I thought it was like a duty of care. You have a duty of care. So pointing out the harms maybe is also an opportunity to encourage teachers of why this work is important. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. And we've probably got just time for one more question because we do like to keep these to an hour. We promise to do that. And this comes from Rachel. Rachel says, a tension I wonder about is the fact that schools are largely colonial institutions whose goal is to shape these individualized, successful, in quotation marks, consumers. How then do we shift not only climate education, but also the intention and purpose of schools themselves?
Yeah.
The big one.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just reading through it again. Yeah, it is a tension. They are colonial institutions. They are institutions deeply also rooted in different ideologies like white supremacy, colonialism, and that is there, that is present. And so I think one way to start that is to acknowledge that. Again, we can't deal with what we're not willing to acknowledge. And so we do have to acknowledge that we are working typically in the Western education system within institutions that are formed around and grounded in very inequitable, unjust ideologies and systems and models of knowledge. So acknowledging that, articulating that, but then getting into, okay, well, how does that impact this issue? So again, thinking about, well, how does that impact science, or how does that impact the way we think about history? How does that, how are we framing history? Going back to framing and language and things like that. So, thinking about how we hold institutions to account by naming what it is, first of all. And then we can maybe start to say, okay, well, if we know this institution is working in this framework of injustice, where are the opportunities? Who's doing other models, right? Look out in the world and see there are other models out there. They're happening. And so where's the opportunity to take apart and build at the same time? There's this idea of and I've learned this from youth and youth organizing. There's a lot of this idea of burn it down, tear it down. But that can be terrifying because there's nothing currently in the space of what was left behind. And so as we deconstruct, we have to be building. We have to show what is possible so that people can say, I see where I'm going to land. I'm going to take this apart, but I see what's taking its shape, and that's good. And I want to move in that direction. So hopefully we can maybe do some of that.
Thank you so much. You've raised such interesting points throughout your talk, and Sarah has popped already your 3 different guides into the chat, but we'll be sending those out afterwards. Could I ask everybody who's in the room with us today to join me in thanking Meghan for a wonderful talk today? Just fantastic. And Sarah has just launched the exit poll. If you can give us a little bit of feedback about how this met your learning needs today, that would be fantastic. We would really welcome that from you. And I will say that we've got lots of events coming up this year. The level of conversation that's been happening in the chat has been really amazing, which just speaks to the quality of climate educators and climate activists I think that we've got in the room today. I wish we were in person. But lovely to learn from each of you. Thank you. And we encourage you to come back and learn some more with us. We've got all sorts of events coming up this fall, including another event on October 16th. We're working in partnership with the Accelerating Climate Change Education and Teacher Education National Project. And so that some of you may have come to this webinar, in fact, today through their mailing lists. We've got a wonderful, one of the deans of ed at Brandon University is actually going to be speaking to us on October 16th about Earthwise and heart-centered teacher education in the Anthropocene. And that's based on a book that she's been writing has written with colleagues on that topic. We've got another one that Maria Van Vlies and myself are going to lead on climate connections. And we're running the national e-course again for those of you who might like to join in. The registration is just opened, and we'll be sure to include the link for you in the resources package that we send out. And then finally, for TDSB folks, we would love to have you at the, we're calling it the Kickoff Conference this year, which is taking place on October 30th. And the EcoSchools team has just sent out information to everybody on their email list about that. We encourage you to track down that email or to go on the TDSB's website, and we'll again include a link for that as well. Wish we could invite everybody to that, but that one is unfortunately limited to TDSB teachers and OISE grad students. So thank you again, Meghan, for your time today. And thank you for sharing your incredible thinking on this topic, as well as your beautiful artistic works. They go hand in hand and they really are fabulous. So anybody who's going to be sharing her illustrations, please, please, please be sure that you are giving Meghan credit for those amazing illustrations along the way too. So thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you at future webinars and other events moving forward. Thanks, everybody.